Hey, Olive, Arlo, and Frank. Grandpa coming to you from the living room in Jacksonville Beach. By tomorrow morning, there's a storm that's going to come ashore over on the Gulf Coast, the West Coast. Um, kind of close to the Panhandle, above Tampa, pretty far above Tampa. Kind of near Tallahassee, which is the state capital. And it's going to come towards this way. It's moving away from Jacksonville a little bit at a time, but we will get some wind and everything. I've gone out on the back deck and taken all the deck furniture and put it down into the backyard out of the wind. So I'm just sitting here. I cooked dinner tonight for your grandmother and me, and I'm just relaxing. Hopefully I won't fall asleep during reading this to you. These are sometimes used to help put kids to sleep, but this might put Grandpa to sleep. And today we're once again in the Book of Heroes by William J. Bennett, who used to be, I think, the Secretary of Education. And the story that we're going to read today is David and Goliath. And here's that's Goliath. And then that's the Philistine army behind Goliath. So, and what's this? This is probably over here. That's David, and he's a boy. He's a teenage boy. I think some people think he was like 16, and some people think he may have been as young as 13. This is a story from the Bible. And it says, "Here is one of the world's most beloved heroes, a boy who found his courage in his faith." And that's what this story is all about. It's about having faith. Long ago, in the land of Bethlehem, which is where David was from, it means house of bread, the house of bread. There lived a shepherd boy named David. David was young, but he was also brave. His eye was keen and his hands were strong. Sometimes fierce wild beasts would creep up the hillside where David watched his sheep and try to seize a lamb. Then David would rush forward to defend his flock. Sometimes he took his sling and hurled a stone at the beast, and he never missed the mark. So what they're talking about, it's like a slingshot, but it's a stick. It's a stick that comes up, and it has this like leather, probably made out of sheepskin or something, goat skin. And you put a rock in it, and you can whirl it around a couple times, and then you go, and it flings it really far. It goes further than you could throw it, or farther than you can throw it. I always get those two mixed up. And faster. So now on the beach, people walk their dogs. It's like 2 blocks from here. And they have these things that are, I call them ball slings. They're these long kind of rods. They're maybe 2 feet long. And you put a ball at the one end, and then you can reach back and go and flip it, and it shoots the ball. And the ball goes maybe 3 times further than you could throw it if you tried throwing it. And this is the same thing, but it was a weapon. So you could hunt with these things, David protected the sheep. He was a shepherd. His father's name was Jesse, and he had brothers. He was the youngest. And he was the ruddy runt. Nobody took him seriously. It's a little bit like Joseph in the book of Genesis. All his brothers looked down at him and like, yeah. So David watched the sheep, and so an animal would come up and try to snatch him. Then David would rush forward to defend his flock, and sometimes he took his sling and hurled a stone at the beast, and he never missed his mark. So I kind of reread that again, which is fine because now you know what he did. He went and flung this thing. There came a time when the army of the Philistines, and they were the enemy of the children of Israel, the army of the Philistines came marching across the hills to drive the people of Israel away from their homes. King Saul gathered his own army and went out to meet them. David's 3 older brothers went with the king, but David was left at home to tend the sheep. "You are too young," they told him. "Stay in the fields and keep the flocks safe." You think that's where he wanted to be? I don't think so. 40 days went by, and no news of the battle came. Then David's father called him and said, "Take this food to your brothers in the camp and see how they are doing." David set out early in the morning and journeyed up the hill where King Saul's army was camped. There was a great shouting between the army of the Israelites and the army of the Philistines when David arrived. He made his way through the ranks and found his brothers. As he stood talking with them, silence fell upon King Saul's army. For there on the opposite hillside, where the Philistine army lay, stood a great giant. And I've actually been to this place. The tour guide that I had when I went to Israel figured out exactly where this happened. There's a traditional site, and it's not really that close to it. But he figured out it's right off an intersection, a modern intersection, which is based off the ancient roads from back then. I mean, even before the Romans were there and building roads and everything, there were roads that people took. There were dirt paths, but they kind of stayed the same. They didn't really change. People wanted to be near water, so they lived near water, and then they traded with each other, so they went to the different towns. So the road stayed the same. And he figured out exactly where this happened, And we went out there, and he gave us a Bible teaching on this story. It was chilling. So there was a great giant out there. He strode up and down, his armor glittering in the sun. His shield was as large as a great chariot wheel, and the sight of his mighty sword slashing the air struck terror in the hearts of King Saul's men. So he's not like a giant where he's as big as a house. Need a little light. He's just bigger than people. This guy was probably like 9 or 10 feet tall. I'm 6 foot tall. So he was me and a half bigger, we'll say. It is the great giant Goliath, David's brothers told him. Each day he strides over the hill and calls out his challenge to the men of Israel, but no man among us dares to stand before him. So what's going on here is these two armies could just come out and fight. One would win, and if they didn't win, they'd just both fall back and they'd come out and fight again. But sometimes what they would do is they would pick their best person, and they'd say, here's the deal. We all want to get back safely to our families. You pick your best guy and come out and fight my best guy. And whoever's best guy wins, they win the battle. The other army has to go home. They lost. We'll make whatever the peace arrangement is, and the war is over. But nobody wanted to fight this dude because he was twice as big as them. And so everything that he had was bigger than what they had. His sword was like twice as long as their sword. They couldn't get close to him. They couldn't reach up and like stab him in the chest. They couldn't hit him over the head. They were like midgets, as opposed to this guy. So what do you think David says? This runny little kid. What? Are the men of Israel afraid? Asked David. Will no one go to meet him? Then I will go forth and meet this giant myself. I have no fear of him, for I know that God will go with me. King Saul heard about his words and called David. When he saw that David was only a boy, he tried to talk him out of facing the giant alone. But David had no fear. The Lord will keep me safe, he told Saul. And so these are the Israelites. They believe in God. They believe in Yahweh. Very well, said King Saul. Go, and the Lord be with you. Then the king ordered his guards to bring his very own armor and sword for David. So David's just a kid. He's, this Goliath has armor on. He has this big shield, this big sword. So what's David going to fight in? So they bring him King Saul's armor. But David said, I cannot fight with these. I am not skilled in their use. He put them down, for he knew that each man must win his battles with his own weapons. So what do you think David's weapon's going to be? So first, here's David talking to Saul and Saul's counselors. And in the Bible, it actually says that David tried on the armor. So you can see David down there on the right. And there's the sling that he has. It's different than a slingshot. So, Goliath, look how big Goliath is compared to David. And David's closer to I was going to say the camera, but it's not a camera. David's closer to us in the perspective of this. It looks like a watercolor. Then he took his staff in his hand. So this is what he has with him. There's a staff, there's a little bag, and he has the sling. Then he took his staff in his hand, with his shepherd's bag and sling hanging at his side. He set out from the camp of Israel. He ran down the hillside and came to a stream. There he stooped and chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, which he dropped into his bag. The army of King Saul watched in silent wonder from one hill, while the host of the Philistines watched from the other. The great giant saw David and strode out to meet him. When Goliath saw that it was only a boy coming, he stopped. "Do the men of Israel mock me by sending a child against me?" he shouted. "Turn back, or I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." And in the Bible, it goes, it's not that it says you send a child, it's like you send a dog out here with a stick. You know, I'm a warrior, I'm a giant warrior. You send a little boy, you send like a puppy that fetched a stick because he has his staff. Doesn't show the staff in the illustration. So he's saying he's going to kill him, and then the birds are going to come and peck at his flesh, and the beasts of the field are going to come and eat his flesh. But David had no fear in his heart, for he knew that God was with him. He put his hand into his bag and took one of the stones from it. He fitted it into his sling, and his keen eye found the place in the giant's forehead that the helmet did not cover. And you can see right up there, there's actually, the way they illustrate it, there's two spots there that he could hit him. He could hit him in the eye, and then that would mess him up. But if he could fracture his skull, it's better than hit him in the eye. He would just be really, really mad if he got hit in the eye with a rock, like, ah, why I oughta? As Goliath rushed forth to meet David, the shepherd drew his sling, and with all the force of his strong right arm, he hurled the stone, so it whizzed through the air and struck Goliath's forehead. His huge body tottered, then fell crashing to the ground. As he lay with his face upon the earth, David ran swiftly to his side, drew forth the giant's own sword, and severed his huge head from his body. And he actually, I'm sure they don't talk about it in here, he actually, takes the sword and the head, grabs it by the hair, and I forget where he goes with it. But the sword stays around forever. Eventually he disposes of the head. But this is a kid's book. Yeah, in this book he just chops his head off. The kid version. He doesn't strut around with the sword and the head going like, wah, na, 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 na. Don't tell your grandmother I went off the rails on this story. As soon as the army of Israel saw this, they rose with a great shout and rushed down the hillside. When the Philistines saw their greatest warrior slain by this lad, they fled toward their own land, leaving their tents and all their riches behind. David the shepherd boy became known throughout the land for his bravery and his faith, and years later he became Melech Israel. He became the king of Israel. And he's the most famous king. So there's David. Doesn't cut the head off yet. And then up there, it's hard to see, but all that little lines at the top of the hill there, that's the Israelite army. So, until next time, Peace out.